Board. All right, Malika, can you tell us, is it Asar for your last name? Always.
Yes.
And she was both an undergrad and a graduate student at Western Illinois University. Did you get your degrees in biology, even though you know you worked in the chemistry?
No, I got them in chemistry.
Both of them?
Yeah.
Oh, even your master's in chemistry? Mm-hmm. Okay. And as we do have some people that work in Dr. Sondergaard's lab who works with ovarian cancer, but gets their degree in biology too. So I wasn't sure where you stood on that. That's really awesome. So you obviously took a lot of biology classes, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but could you briefly share a little bit about your time at Western, and then maybe how you kind of prepared for the medical route, and then I'll obviously expand on some questions with you. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sure. So I was actually a transfer student to Western. So I started my sophomore year. And I knew I wanted to do research because I really wanted to do that as part of my career. So I started in the chemistry department, and I joined Dr. Sondergaard's lab really fast and kind of got started. I really love research. And then as I went through my undergrad and then graduate school, I honed in on the fact that I did want to do medical school and then perhaps get a PhD after. And so I kind of chose classes that I knew would help me get into medical school and help me do well on the MCAT, and then benefit me while I'm in school as well. And I also think, at least from feedback I've heard from like my admissions process, that the research that I did really helped set me apart from other applicants. So that was a big deal to my application.
And your research was in what at Western?
Oh, so when I was an undergrad, I worked with ovarian cancer, and I worked with a peptide that binds to ovarian cancer. And then when I did my master's, I worked with pancreatic cancer, and I did the whole project where I found a peptide that only binds to pancreatic cancer cells. And then I worked with trying to figure out how well they bound, and kind of worked with that, did imaging and stuff like that. So.
Was your undergraduate actually an honors project, or was it just kind of freelancing?
I did an honors project. I was in the honors college. And then I also published the research I did for undergrad and graduate school. So I was first author for both of those. So good.
And at Western, that's a big deal. So we try to get things published, but for a student to actually get published before or within a timely manner is a really big accomplishment. I've had a lot of grad students, and only a few of them have actually accomplished that. So I'd probably put you in the top 10% of grad students I've seen at Western. Yeah. I've seen some really good ones, and you probably were one of the stars that I've seen, even though you weren't in my lab per se. This from being around, we've had a lot of really good ones too. Were you certain that you wanted to go into medical school after your master's degree? And do you think you still want to do a PhD after all that as well?
Yes. So I knew for sure that I wanted to do medical school after I finished undergrad. And I did everything I could for that. And I am definitely still considering a PhD. However, with a medical degree, it's not really, I don't need one to do research. I can do clinical research with just my medical degree. So it will really depend on the kinds of projects I want to do. But I think the type of research I want to do is more clinical based. So I'll be okay with just my degree.
Mm-hmm. And then how did you prepare for, one of the things that people ask a lot is, how did you prepare for the MCAT at Western? Obviously, I don't know if there's any, I'm sure you did a lot of it on your own or through some type of organization. How did you prepare for an MCAT while being a student and doing everything else?
Yeah, so I definitely prepared by myself. I didn't use like an outside program or like a tutor or anything. I think the biggest thing, honestly, for me was like doing practice questions. And even in medical school, that's still the biggest thing, is seeing how they're going to present the material to you in a question on the test. Like, you can know all the facts, but if you can't interpret a question, then you won't be able to use the knowledge that you do have. So I started my MCAT prep by just doing content review. And I did that for maybe like a month to a month and a half, I just hit content review really hard. It did help that I was in biochemistry classes, so I already had that pretty solid background. And then I just spent time doing practice tests. And the MCAT is a marathon because it's just an 8-hour, like long test. And so I did timed tests where I would just sit down and take each section of the test, and I would just practice like the stamina to get through it. Cause I honestly think that's one of the hardest parts of it. So.
Did you do pretty, not to, you don't have to tell us, but did you score pretty high on the MCAT?
Yeah, I did pretty well.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so let me think what I was going to go with this. Okay, so you're an osteopathic medicine route right now. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit of the differences between osteopathic approach to medicine and allopathic? I've explained to the students with an osteopathic approach, you can practice in any field. Mm-hmm. I know that there may be some adjustments that you may learn from the chiropractic side. I don't even know if you get that much training in it or not. You might explain more about that. And I know it's supposed to be a little bit more holistic. Is that an important part of the getting into those schools? I think you need to know all that kind of approach, or maybe just you go from there, but that's kind of, maybe first let's teach students a little bit about that. DOs, MDs, and the different schools, whatever you can share on that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So yes, DOs and MDs are the same exact thing. I can have any residency, any position that I want, same as an MD. Our residencies merged last year, so our spots are the same. So there's no separate residency programs. So we're all in the same pool. Yeah, it's actually really nice. So I could.
So that's very recent that all the residencies are joined. Do they even have DO hospitals anymore? There used to be DO hospitals.
I don't think so. Don't quote me on that for sure. But I think for the most part, everything combined. So yes, one other good thing about that too is our first board exam, both STEP is the MD exam and COMLEX is the DO exam, both switched to pass-fail exams. So we combined our residencies, and so they're all the same at this point. So the difference is that, like you said, DO is more of a holistic approach to medicine. We still learn all the same clinical stuff. We still learn all the same science. Actually, some of my friends who are in MD programs, our curriculum is literally the same. We have the same exact material that we're being taught. The only difference is the DOs have an extra, I guess, course that we have where we learn osteopathic manipulation. And that is, I guess, in a summary, kind of like what chiropractors do, but we learn it more medically. So if a patient comes in with some symptom, we learn how to treat it with medicine, but we also learn how like your skeletal system and your muscular system can all impact that dysfunction that you have. So I think it combines two very important parts, being like physiologic and musculoskeletal, into one degree. So it helps me at least treat patients in multiple different ways, because some people don't want medicine, and that's fine. You know, if I can treat them in a different way, then that's still valuable as a physician. So
do you think in practice the DOs and MDs are really any different, or do you think that holistic approach really, I mean, I'm not trying to say it's paying lip service or anything, but do you think I get the idea, at least if you're a surgeon, it probably doesn't matter at all, but
yeah.
Maybe, is there a real advantage then to going to DO school that you think?
I would say yes.
Can you expand?
Yeah. I definitely think the advantage to going to DO is that you learn other ways to treat patients. So of course, some specialties might not use osteopathic medicine as much, like surgery or orthopedics. But if you're in family medicine or internal medicine, and you're seeing patients who don't need to be prescribed a medication, you know, if it's just something like my arm hurts, you know, maybe you don't need to be on a bunch of ibuprofen. You can get a treatment where we can kind of help to fix that. So I think that the people who I know who are going into family medicine, internal medicine, those types of fields, my third and fourth year friends, they use that stuff on their patients, and their patients will specifically request to see them actually and make osteopathic appointments for that. So I think if you're looking at something like that, there's a real advantage to doing that. And it's honestly, I kind of like it. It's a nice break from studying from medical school because it's something that you can practice and you're physically doing, and it still helps you, right, with your degree. So I really like it.
Do you have now with residencies and getting matched, is that you get to choose some areas, or is it kind of a mixture of the both? Obviously, you kind of have to choose each other, I guess, the residency. And that's one of the biggest bottlenecks, right? The next bottleneck kind of into what you actually do.
Yeah.
When does matching happen, and what is your dream matching that you're hoping to do?
Yes. So matching happens fourth year. So basically, first and second year of medical school is what we call didactics. So you're in class, you're learning materials, you're studying in a classroom. Third year and fourth year, you're on rotations. So you're in a clinic, you're in a hospital, and you're working with doctors and seeing patients. Fourth year is where you do what are called like audition rotations. So you basically go to programs that you would like to match into, and you can work with them to see if you're a good fit to that program. And so then you submit a residency application. The fourth years just submitted them last week. And then you do interviews. So you'll interview with different programs and you make a rank list. So say I would pick, for example, Western as my number one choice. And if Western also listed me as their number one choice in the people they interviewed, we would match. So then I would go to Western for the specialty that I interviewed for. So I really would like to go into pathology. So I really want to do clinical and anatomical pathology because it's really lab-based and I love the lab. I can still do research and it's a good work-life balance. So I don't want to say it's a 9 to 5, but it's pretty much a 9 to 5 where I would go in, I'd look at samples, I'd write reports and stuff like that. And I can still see patients if I want to, but I don't have to. So yeah, I'd really like to do
that. Would that expand into radiology too? Or not?
No, radiology would be a different specialty. So pathology is more like histology, looking at slides, looking at biopsies, doing biopsies, and making definitive diagnoses. So a surgeon might send me a biopsy from a tumor and say, what kind of, is this primary, is secondary, stuff like that. So then I would go in, do some tests, do some analyses, and then make the definitive diagnosis.
Does that mean you probably work with a lot of medical technologists and clinical lab scientists and things like that? Yeah. Would you have a team and almost be kind of in that where you're kind of running a team of technicians, I guess would be the right word. I don't know, the wrong word, but so that's interesting. I didn't realize that what you were interested in. So you really do like the lab a lot from what I'm gathering from what you explained.
Oh yeah, cool. Absolutely.
And then, so that is very academically, what I'm saying is kind of, when you think about different types of doctors, I guess you would call that the more academic doctor, right? I mean, I know in quotes, maybe, I don't know if they even use that kind of terminology versus maybe the general practitioner or something. If you got to really, is that right? Or am I just totally out there when
No, yeah, it's more clinical lab science based rather than like patient interaction based. So I love the lab and I enjoy that atmosphere. And so I think that would be a good field for me. And you do a lot of pathology in your second year, you learn a lot more. And so that's what I'm in right now. And so I'm finding that this is what I truly like. It sounds so cheesy, but I was talking to my professor the other day and I was like, this is just what I feel a calling to. Like, I think that this is where I belong. So
I guess I'm thinking, and I know this is a stereotype, but the brainiacs of the doctor world would be pathologists. Well, I could see an ER doctor being very important, but not necessarily the brainiac. They'd be the high adrenaline. I mean, those are the stereotypes I would think. So you wouldn't necessarily be a general practitioner. So you might not have much of an opinion on nurse practitioners or physician assistants and or anything like that? Or do you have any opinions on them? Or is that a good route to go, you think? Or
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on kind of what you want to do. So I don't know too much about the schooling that goes into nurse practitioner or PAs. But I know it is shorter than medical school. And I don't think you take the same type of boards as we do. So we have 3 levels of boards, and then we take residency oral boards. But I'm not sure about what the other fields do. But if you don't want to go to medical school for 4 years and then do a 3 to 7 year fellowship or residency and then a fellowship after, I mean, that's a good way to go. This is a big commitment. It's a lot of money and it's a lot of time and stress.
So pathology, sorry to interrupt you. Pathology, is that a 5 to 7 year? Was it that long?
No. So pathology is I think so it really depends on which field of pathology you go into, but the one I want to do is a 4-year residency. And then I would like to do a derm path. So like melanomas and stuff like that. And so I would go to a 1-year dermatology fellowship. So extra.
Not to encourage you to do a PhD, but I can see a pathology residency matching well with a PhD program if it was in the same institution or whatever, but not that it's needed necessarily, as you've already explained. So that surprised me. I didn't really know which field you were going into, but you were really into research. And I've had students that weren't as into research that went on to medical school, and so you definitely came from the more serious research side of things.
Yeah.
Is there anything, I'm going to hand it off to the students to ask questions, but is there anything that maybe that we didn't touch on that you want to mention, that maybe, what's a day in the life of a medical student? I guess that could be an important question.
So honestly, it really depends for me. My days kind of are wild. It depends on whether it's an exam week or not an exam week. Like, for example, today I had an exam this morning. And so I woke up at 5 o'clock and I got to school at 6 and my exam was at 8:15. So I just kind of practiced with my friends and studied for a little bit before. And then I took like 15 minutes to just decompress because it was like high stress. But that was today. Excuse me, and that was an osteopathic practical exam. So we had to do a technique and we were graded on that. But if we had just a regular didactic exam, I would say just a normal day, I would wake up around 6:30-ish. If I had class, I'd go into school, do the class. And then I like to plan out, it's gonna sound psychotic. I like to plan out every hour of my day because I feel like I use my time wisely then. So I put in what I'm gonna do for each hour. And then I will complete that task in that hour and then move on to the next one. And if I don't complete it, I kind of just have like a couple hours at the end of the day where I'm like, finish everything else that you didn't do. But pretty much wake up at 6:30, classes, if I have a class, and then I just basically study all day. I go through lectures, I review with my friends, I do flashcards and watch review videos, do practice questions. So it's a pretty heavy schedule this year.
Now I know you're a particularly motivated master's student, and you know that master's students can vary a lot. Did the program here, and particularly with Dr. Sondergaard, help you a lot to prepare for your time at the medical school?
Yeah, definitely. I think in many ways it did. So the master's program is kind of, you get out of it what you put into it. Right. So if you are motivated to work hard and like achieve really high levels of success, then you're going to have to work for it. And that's the same thing in medical school. And so I knew when I started the program that I wanted to publish another paper. I wanted to have a really strong thesis and I wanted to get a lot done. So I made sure that I put my best foot forward and actually did that. And I'm glad that I did, because medical school is very similar, where you have to put a lot of work in to be successful. And it is much harder, I would say, than the master's degree, obviously. But I think starting with a baseline of a high level of success is really helpful, because you know how to work hard. So you know that you can't just sail through a master's, and you can't just sail through medical school. So
it was the classes particularly more difficult, or just a lot more of them?
In school, in medical school, the classes are much more difficult. So, like, for example, we have blocks. So our first block was 4 weeks, and the first 2 weeks I learned everything that had to do with biochemistry. And it was just like all the metabolism, all of everything else that we did, proteins and DNA and all that stuff. So it's really just a ton of information that's coming at you, and you have to be able to sit down and organize it and sift through it and keep ahead of the schedule. I would say, like, it's very easy to get behind if you let yourself. So it is, I'd say the classes, just the amount of information we have is just a lot.
And if somebody didn't come from with your strong of a background, were they suffering a lot more, you think?
Yeah, like I hate to say it, but I did know several people who, didn't pass classes or had to redo the whole year. And I think it's just because they weren't used to a level of work that it took. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I wasn't even used to the level of work that it took. It did take some time for me to adjust to how difficult medical school is. And that's okay. Everybody has the adjustment period, but the people who weren't able to figure it out soon enough did kind of get left behind. And I feel bad saying that because, everybody deserves a chance, but it is something you have to learn how to do very quickly. So
I got 2 more questions and I'll pass it back. Are the certificates behind you? Are they related to Western or some other place?
Oh, sorry. It's just my little shrine to myself to remind myself sometimes. Yeah. Those are, they're like awards I got at Western. And then
Noticed the purple, so I kind of figured.
Yeah. They're about like research, biochemistry, department scholar, all that stuff. Yeah.
Well, research can be really tough to publish, right? That must have been a real big challenge.
Oh, yeah. My research schedule at Western was unbelievable. Like I was doing like 12-hour research days. Like you just have to, if you want to publish at this level, yeah. It's just a lot. And I wanted to be first author. I don't like being second author. So, yeah.
The other thing is, now the school itself is Kansas City Health University. Is that that's the name of it?
It's just Kansas City University. They keep changing the name. Yeah.
Okay. And it's a little bit in a rougher side of town, but how do you like Kansas City in general? Did you ever go visit Kansas City before that? And have you really gone out and seen the suburbs and all the different, and so
yeah.
And be careful, because I am from Kansas City.
No, it's a nice city. Like it's great. It's not my favorite. Obviously, I love Chicago. But it is a beautiful city. I actually live up north. I live 20 minutes from the school, so I live in a suburb actually.
Kansas City or not?
Yeah, it's still in Kansas City. Yeah.
It is Kansas City or North Kansas City, or is it actually in Kansas City proper?
No, it's actually in Kansas City. Yeah. I don't know why. Like it goes Kansas City, then North Kansas City, then Kansas City again. So
okay.
Yeah.
Like near Gladstone or something like that.
It's a little bit further north from Gladstone. Yeah. It's on, I don't know if you know where Barry Road is, but yeah.
Well, me and Sue went to Park University.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You ever driven past Park University?
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So I better and if you want her to see you, you're welcome to come down here and just sit where I'm at. And you can say hi to her for a second. And then, or you can not. But anybody, I'm going to open up some questions. Otherwise, I'll get to have all the pleasure of asking questions. So, yes, ma'am.
How many medical schools did you apply to versus how many did you get into?
That's a good question. So I applied actually twice. And so I applied to fewer the second time around because I knew I wanted to do DO. I think I applied to 7 and I got into 2.
Is there 15 DO schools, or do you know what the number is?
I don't know that.
I know they've increased the number. There's one in Chicago, I think, too.
Yeah. Midwestern, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're asking tougher questions than I want to ask.
That's fine.
So,
I will say on that note, please, if you're going to apply, cast a really wide net, because the stakes are actually rising for applying, because I don't actually know why, but I would say apply to as many schools as you can. Make sure your application is very strong. And if you need more advice, you can just email me or whatever, that's fine. But yeah, apply to as many as you can, interview at as many as you can, and you have a better chance. So.
All right, who wants to ask the next question? I know I saw a hand, I thought coming up. Yes, ma'am.
So can you just kind of like walk us through what the process is for applying to medical school? Like what steps do people do that?
Yeah. So basically you take the MCAT, obviously, and then you're gonna send in your primary applications. I would get them in as early as possible. I think I try to get mine in by the beginning of July of the application year. And then once you get your application in, your primaries, then you'll get secondaries from schools. So the secondaries can either be like they give a secondary application to everyone, or they will read your primary and then decide from there who gets a secondary. And then once you do the secondary application, which is typically shorter, and all the ones I got were essay based. So they were just like short essays I had to write. Then you submit your secondaries and you get interviews. And then once you do an interview, then they will let you know if you got in, if you're not accepted, or if you're waitlisted. And then from there you'll.
All right, who's going to ask a question? Yes, sir.
How do you avoid getting burnt out?
That's a great question. And I'm going to be honest with you, you don't. I definitely am exhausted all of the time. And I think the best thing that I know how to do is just, if I get to the point where I realize I'm not really getting anything from what I'm studying, or I'm really tired, I just put my stuff away. I'll go for a walk, or I'll do a 20-minute workout, just something that's completely different from studying. I know a lot of my friends try to watch videos during those times, but I find that if I'm still trying to study, I just make it worse. But I don't know if this is the right thing to say, but I would just say it's very normal to feel constantly just tired. It's just a lot to do, and it's a big commitment. So I can't really say I avoid getting burnt out, because I most definitely am. So.
Okay, sir.
So assuming you went to an interview for medical school, how did you prepare for that interview?
That's a good question. So it really depends. Some schools actually release their questions for interviews. So you can just look through their questions and then prepare for that. The one for my school actually didn't release the interview questions, and we actually had to sign a non-disclosure agreement saying we won't tell people what the questions are. So I didn't know ahead of time. But one thing I will say is what really helped me was actually, I don't know, Dr. Moss, if you remember Jamie Greathouse.
Yeah.
She was one of my really good friends at Western, and she's a 4th year medical student. And so when I was interviewing at KCU, I reached out to her and asked her the same exact question. She said, one thing that is really good is to make sure you have a couple anecdotes that could fit typical interview questions. So, I mean, just go with, for example, if I ask you, why do you want to go into medicine? If you have a reason for why, that's not just I want to help people, because everybody wants to help people, have an actual reason for why. And then you can think about okay, what makes you a good doctor, stuff like that. Know the typical questions and have 2 or 3 stories that could kind of fit any question they'll ask. I think that's a really good tip she had. And I actually wrote out little stories and had them next to me before the interview, and I could literally just glance down, because mine was over Zoom. I could just glance down and I knew what I was going to say to the questions. And you get some interesting questions during some of these interviews, and I don't know, just I just had fun with it. Like I laughed with my interviewer, like joked around. It was really fun. So you just have to show them that you're smart and you're also a person, because everybody who's applying to medical school is intelligent, obviously. But if you're also personable and you can have a conversation and you are able to make the other person feel comfortable, then that's something that really helps to your advantage.
Cool. All right, who has another question?
What's some programs that
Speak well.
in college that you would suggest like before going to medical school or like onto pathology?
So you were asking what kind of classes to take?
I was looking more like programs like clubs and whatnot, but also
Oh, okay. So did you hear what he said?
No.
He wants to know what clubs you might want to suggest, or things that maybe help you, or I'll expand on it, to maybe help your options. Like, did you join some clubs? Did you do some internships? Did you maybe do, like, there's also like some people do this first responder program on campus. There's all sorts of things like that, and pre-professional health club. What did you do to kind of enrich your
So obviously I did research. That was a huge part of my application just because of the volume of research I did. But I also started the biochem club in the chem department. I don't know if any of you guys know about that club, but I started that when I was a senior, I think I want to say. So I did that, and I had speakers and stuff like that. And then I also was in Women in Science, and I did the RISE program. So that's the research over the summer. So I got 2 scholarships, 2 summers in a row for that one, which was really fun and really nice. What else did I do? Oh, I shadowed a pediatrician actually in Macomb, Dr. Lockard. She's wonderful, and she really helped me. She wrote me a really strong recommendation letter. So that's another thing that I would say. When you do activities, it's all fine and well if you're in clubs or you do volunteering, but it has to like be meaningful. And those are the people who are going to actually write you recommendation letters, are going to help you with your career. So I wouldn't just join like 8 different clubs just to say that you did, because I mean, everybody has clubs in their resume, but if you can say like, oh, I founded the biochemistry club and I did this because I have a passion for biochem and I want other people to, learn about it, blah, blah, blah. That's something that actually means something. So those are the kinds of clubs that I did. But I know like biology department has other ones too. I just was more focused on biochem.
I think the other thing about your research that maybe gets ferried out is if somebody does pseudoscience where they kind of went into a lab for a few weeks and then they want to really puff it up and make it sound like they did something. I'm sure that happens occasionally, but I don't know if you even help with interviews or seen that kind of thing. I just assume it happens.
Oh, I see that all the time. And it's huge in medical school actually, because everybody wants research for their residency applications. So they'll do some random Zoom or online research thing, and they'll make it seem like this huge research project that they did. And like, it sounds conceited, but like coming from someone who actually did real research, it's very transparently obvious that they did not do real research. They did like some survey. So yeah, I see a lot of that and it's very clear. So I wouldn't just join a lab for like a few weeks and think that you're gonna get, because in my interview, they actually asked me, they were like, you did mark on your application that you did research. Can you tell me about it? And so they asked me about the project, like in-depth questions. So if I had just made that up, like I wouldn't have an answer to that. So I'm sure people got burned by that.
I had a student though that did get a master's with me and went to your school and now doctor. And he thanked me later for pushing him as hard as he wasn't as motivated as you, but I used to have to push him to do research. Mm-hmm. He was just good at getting, grades, and obviously he did what he needed to in medical school, but he later thanked me for pushing him in research because it did help him for residencies or something later.
Yeah.
So did you have a question?
Yeah. How many times did you take the MCAT?
I took it twice, actually. So this was a really annoying, like weird story, sorry. So I took it the first time. I was fine with my score, but I was like, I can do better. And so I took it again, and I studied very differently for the second time. I did more practice questions the second time around, and I think that genuinely helped me. I raised my score quite a bit. And then I actually got into a car accident the week before my MCAT, and it was a really bad accident. And I actually still have problems from it. This was like in 2019. And it genuinely very much affected my testing. And so that wasn't great. And I actually did worse the second time because I couldn't take my medication. I was on like 7 different pills. I couldn't take any of them because they put you to sleep. So my doctor was like, you can't take this during your MCAT because you'll just fall asleep. So I just had to take ibuprofen, and that obviously you can't take that much of. So it was horrible. But I took it twice. And I think there's nothing wrong with taking it twice. I have people in my class who took it 3-4 times. Take it seriously, and because it is a difficult test. Like, do what you need to do for it. Don't just rely on the fact that you can take it, I think 6 times. I mean, there are people who did take it 6 times, but I wouldn't suggest doing that. That's a lot of money. So I would just take the first time or second time seriously, study really hard. And if you have questions, just ask. Like, people know how to help you.
Did you get much family pressure to be a doctor?
Actually, no. My family did not want me to be a doctor. My parents, they actually really wanted me to do research. They wanted me to get a PhD. And they just thought that medical school was very expensive. Like, I am going to be in so much debt. And they were like, it's very stressful. It's a lot. There are no doctors in my immediate family. So they didn't really know what I was getting myself into. They just saw the dollar sign and were like, no. So no, actually I had no pressure to be a doctor.
Yeah. I mean, I think now I would say that the bottleneck to get into medical school is quite a bit tighter than maybe a PhD program, depending on the prestige of the PhD program. But it's so hard to get a decent job after your PhD that there's some benefits to the route you're going, actually, because you'll have a more lucrative opportunities.
Yeah.
The getting a job like Dr. Sondergaard had is a real big challenge, and she did a lot to get there, right?
Yeah.
In addition to postdocs and stuff. So there's a lot of pros and cons to what your parents and what you wanted, and it sounds like you're going to be kind of in a more academic kind of approach to it, probably. So we got plenty of time still, but who wants to ask a question now? Yes, ma'am.
What was your least favorite class in medical school, and how did you kind of like overcome not liking the class to study for it?
What year are you right now? Second or third?
I'm a second year. So we don't actually have classes like that. We have blocks. So for example, we have like a neuroendocrine block. We have a musculoskeletal block. I would say that the neuroendocrine was my least favorite block. That was the block that I did the worst on.
Not enough dopamine or something.
Yeah. I will say that is the hardest block. That was our lowest scoring block.
Why would you be interested in it, or was it just the way it was presented? Because I would think it'd be fascinating to know about the different hormones in the brain, and so I'm just because I'm studying a little bit of that on my own right now. That's why I mentioned dopamine and serotonin. But go ahead and tell me you should explain your reasons, obviously, but I'm curious.
So when we do the blocks, we have obviously anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and histology and embryology. So all of those go into one block. And so the neuroanatomy really was a lot, and so was the physiology. So apart from like the hormones, the endocrine, I enjoy learning about that because it's something that you can understand. This does this, because it's very similar to biochem. But we had some topics we had to learn. I don't know if you guys teach like about like motor tracts and sensory tracts and stuff like that.
It's very little.
Yeah, they can get really complex, and you have to trace how like the nerves are going and like where the synapses are and stuff like that. And so it's just a lot of information. And we also had anatomy lab where we had to dissect cadavers. And so they would like pin a nerve. They're like, what nerve is this? And so it's just a lot, and neuro was not my favorite. So
No, this is a crazy question because a lot of this is really important to learn, but in some ways it might not be that important once you're really in the practicing, right? It's like learning algebra and maybe never having to use it again.
yeah. So I will say it's important to a point. The physiology and anatomy and such comes back when it comes to dysfunctions and when it comes to like pathologies. So any diseases and stuff, it is important to know what normal is. But it is my hope into the universe that I will never have to answer a question about like a motor track, because I just don't. It just didn't work for me. It didn't sit well. I don't understand it. So
one of the criticisms I hear though about medical training is they don't do enough training to explain nutrition or exercise physiology, things that might just be good about general wellness. Is that true, you think? Or
so actually I think as a DO student, we do talk a lot about movement and stuff like that. So we are, I think, a little more, I don't want to say qualified, but taught more about that kind of stuff and about how different movements and different actions of muscles can help you. And so I think it is getting better. We do have classes where we have to learn about nutrition. We have to learn about like vitamin deficiencies and stuff like that. And so I'm not sure if it's just going to be an upward trend about stuff like that, but I think it is becoming more clear that we need in this country to be like more healthy in general and understand more about that, especially if you're going to go into like pediatrics or like family medicine. That's just a huge part of your job. So we do learn a good amount.
did somebody have a question? I saw over here. Somebody that's never asked a question, why don't you ask the question now? I used to, yeah, thanks, ma'am.
Can you explain like the wait list for?
What happens if you get waitlisted? Is that kind of what you?
Yeah, so I wasn't waitlisted, but what I know from what my friend said, I think they will send you an email and they'll be like, okay, you're waitlisted. You get a certain date, I believe, by when they'll tell you that you're accepted or not. And I think it depends on whether or not the class will fill up, is from what I could understand. So if like spots open because people who were accepted don't accept their acceptance, like if they go somewhere else, a spot opens, so they'll take someone from the wait list. And from what I could understand, they try to take some, again, don't fully quote me on this, I believe they try to take someone with similar like statistics and like background, stuff like that, to those people. So you have a well-rounded class. At least it's what it seemed like to me. So I think you'll just find out if you're off of the wait list. Sorry, I can't answer that better.
Yeah, let's say that you didn't get accepted this time around. What do you think you would have done? Would you have tried again to apply, gone to PhD program, choose another healthcare field?
So that's a really hard question, because I think I would have applied again because I really do want to be a doctor. But I also wouldn't say no to a PhD. I actually worked at UChicago after I left Western, and my advisor, who I did research for there, said that if I didn't get into medical school, that I could get a PhD in his lab. So that would have been fine. I mean, not fine. That would have been wonderful. But I knew that I did want to be a doctor. So that was always the forefront of my mind. But I know sometimes it's just not a good fit. And so I knew I had research also.
Yeah, which, I would say there's probably some doctor types that wouldn't necessarily make the best researchers either, based on my experience anyway, at least with that one student.
Yeah.
Did you have a question? Well, you should ask one. Here, go ahead. Then you're next.
What was your process for your undergraduate research? Like how much time and like how did you go about it?
Yeah, so how did you find a research advisor? Then how much time did you put in as an undergraduate for your research? Obviously you put in more as a master's student.
Yeah. Okay. So when I transferred from Penn, I went to Penn State first. When I transferred because I wanted to join Dr. Sundergaard's lab. I had actually looked her up and all that, and I knew for sure I wanted to join her lab. She was actually new when I joined, I think. I was in your lab first, like I was just shadowing Imtiaz, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Just for like a semester, just to learn about how labs work. But I knew I picked her right away because she was doing ovarian cancer and I really wanted to do that. And then I would say, so my undergrad research.
So I really lost out on a great researcher.
Sorry.
You worked with MTS and I didn't even really realize that.
Yeah, you weren't really around. I don't know why. I think.
I had the department chair then.
Yes, you were. That's why. Yeah. Yeah. He and I just hung out in your lab time and he showed me all his stuff. But I would say research wise, that's really hard to remember. That was like a while ago. I think I put in, I want to say 3-4 hours a day on a hard week. If I had a lot of essays to run, on like a light week, maybe 1 to 2 hours a day. I mean, I actually just made my home base the lab. So I would just study there all day. Like I would get there in the morning and then go to class and come back. And if Dr. Sundergaard wanted to show me how to do something or we needed cells passed or whatever, I would just do it. So I didn't really quantify hours in that sense. I just kind of was there and she saw that I was there all the time. And so she started giving me more and more responsibilities. And then I found that it was something that I was really was good at. And so then I just kept doing it. And I then asked her, I was like, can I have my own project? And she was like, okay. And so it was nice.
My best grad students came from that approach also. I don't know if you knew Brittany Dahl out at MDH or not, but she's the head of the lab over there, medical technology lab. She works with pathologists, I'm sure, but she was one of my best students and she started as an undergrad that just hung out all the time. And then I luckily had a lot of money then. Ma'am, did you have a question?
Yes. How much volunteering did you do in your undergrad?
Outside of research, what kind of volunteering did you do?
I didn't do that much volunteering actually. I did a few things with Dr. Bellet, I think. I was like oh my God. I'm so sorry. This was literally like 6 years ago. I really didn't have that many volunteer hours actually. Oh, I volunteered at a nursing home. That was a big thing that I did. So it's like across the street from Hy-Vee. That nursing home that's kind of set back. I volunteered there 2 to 3 hours a week for a good amount of time. So maybe 100 to 200 hours worth of volunteering. But I don't think it was the amount of hours that I did. I think it was what I got out of the hours. So again, like, I mean, you could have 40,000 hours of volunteering, but if it didn't mean anything to you, like no one's going to care about it, you know, because you have to put on your application, like, oh, I did this many hours and this is why I did it. So you have to explain what it is. So if you just have like, oh, I did volunteering because I like to volunteer, no one's going to care. So I really liked interacting with the patients at the nursing home. I really liked learning about their life and just how they did their day-to-day like stuff. And so it was interesting to see all different types of people. And so that's why I shadowed a pediatrician. I worked at a nursing home. So it was a good range of patients that I might see in the future. So.
Have you been involved in medical student selection since you've been there? Because I think sometimes they allow medical students in to help select.
No, I didn't do that. I'm doing, so that's like a whole different program. I joined like different clubs here and I was like different leadership positions in that sense. Medical student selection was like a big time commitment. So very few people did that.
So we're down to our last minute. Does anybody else have a burning question? If not, I'd like for us to give an applause to soon-to-be Dr. Asar.
Thank you.
If you have pathological needs, she might be looking at a specimen from me someday.
That's fine. Yeah,
Thank
if they
you.
have any more questions, you can just like email me.
Sure, it sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And it's been wonderful. You're doing amazing. I'm so glad that you helped us out today.
Thank you, no problem.
Yeah, thank you so much.
See you later. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
That is.